In lecture 5 of our module 6, we are going to bring back that production possibility frontier and talk about it in relation to economic growth. So, a reminder, when we're talking about our production possibility frontier, it tells us what is possible for our economy to produce. It doesn't tell us what we will produce, what we should produce, but just tells us what we can or what's possible for production. We made some pretty strong assumptions when we looked at our PPF, and then we reduced some of those assumptions and looked at what would happen as we started to eliminate those assumptions to our production possibility frontier. We're going to talk about those assumptions again, get rid of some assumptions, and see how economic growth can actually increase our production possibility frontier or shift it outward from the origin. So we've talked about how we measure GDP or economic growth in terms of increases in real GDP or real GDP per capita. But what we haven't talked about yet is how do we find out if a country can produce more? So what leads to economic growth? Well, there's three big overarching factors that are going to allow us to have growth. And then under each overarching factor, we're going to talk about specifics that lead us to that increase in real GDP. So the first overarching topic is supply factors. So there has to be an increase in that productivity. So there has to be an increase in the amount of goods and services that our economy can supply. So our scarce resources, we have to be able to increase our supply. And that can happen for a few reasons. First, there could be an increase in the quantity or quality of natural resources. So let's suppose that all of a sudden we discover more oil. We have an increase in the quantity of some natural resources, and now we can use that oil to produce more goods and services. It's going to allow us to grow the economy. It's also quality. Quality is also very important. So if we're talking about a quality product, if there's an increase in a quality product, an increase in the quality of, let's say, timber or wood in the United States, all of a sudden that's going to allow us to use those natural resources more effectively. Also, human resources are very important. Human capital. We could increase the quantity of human resources. So we could increase the amount of labor that we have available to us, and all of a sudden our production possibilities increases. Or, and this is why education plays such an important role and the government is so heavily involved, the quality of human resources. As an economy becomes more educated, they become more productive, and it allows them to produce more goods and services. An increase in the supply of capital goods. So if we give our workers more tools, more equipment to work with, it allows them to be more productive. And then finally, improvements in technology can also allow our workers to become more productive. So all of these things can allow us to supply our economy with more goods and services. But it's not supply alone that determines growth. So that is the strong factor. The strong factor is, first, we must see that increase in supply. We must be able, if we're operating on our production possibility frontier, to get beyond it, we must see an increase in the supply somehow. But there are two other conditions that must occur at the same time. The demand factor. So it's not only that our economy is producing more goods and services, but households, businesses, and governments must be willing and able to purchase that expanding output. If they don't, if we don't see, so even if we have these new great technologies that allow us to produce more, well, if nobody purchases the products, then we're going to be operating inside that production possibility frontier, and we're not going to see the expansion out into, or we're not going to see the growth in that real GDP level. And along with this all is that efficiency factor. We must achieve efficiency and full employment. So our efficiency factor is very important for determining economic growth. The closer we are to operating on our production possibility frontier at a level of full employment, that is where we consider our efficient point on our production possibility frontier. That is going to heavily influence the level of growth. And again, remember, when we're talking about full employment, we're just thinking about people who are willing and able to work. So we're not talking about everybody in our economy has to have a job. And we're going to learn more about that in our unemployment section. But what we must see is that we're operating on the production possibility frontier. with our workers who are willing and able to work, having a job, then those households, businesses, and governments must demand the output, whether they are domestic or abroad, and that will allow us then to have that economic growth. But there can also be some institutional structures that promote growth. So it's not just these different categories, these different factors that promote growth. There's also institutional structures that allow our economy to expand. First, strong property rights. When there are strong property rights, it allows our economy to expand. So if it's very clearly marked on who owns the land, right, then I can use my land to be more productive. But if somebody can swoop in and start using my land or stealing the products on my land without my knowledge or without my consent, then I'm going to be less likely to be productive on that land. And so strong property rights are going to be very important to ensuring that we have growth. Patents and copyrights, for the same reason, if the United States has some of the best innovation in terms of pharmaceutical drugs. Why? Because they have some of the strongest patent laws. And so companies that have this new innovation and they spend millions of dollars researching and developing new drugs, well, they're rewarded in the United States with a longer period of time where they're the sole seller of the product. And that's going to promote economic growth. Efficient financial institutions. Matching savers and borrowers is an incredibly important tool that's going to allow economic growth. So if I have this great idea, but I don't have any money and I can't find anybody else who has money that's willing to give me any, well, that idea is not going to go anywhere. And so if we have very efficient financial institutions in place, it can allow entrepreneurs to find people who will fund those ideas and allow for further expansion of our economy. Free trade, and we've already talked about in terms of how trade can allow us to consume outside of our production possibility frontier, but that can also allow us to obtain the capital goods that maybe we can't produce in the United States, or maybe that we didn't think of it outside, or that we didn't think of within the United States, that now allow us to be more efficient. A competitive market system, when firms are competing, they are going to be competing for trying to determine what's the lowest cost method for producing these products. As they're doing that, it's going to encourage innovation, encourage technological growth that's going to further make our economy more productive. All right, so those are some of the institutional structures, things that maybe our government can help support. So when we're talking about that active but limited government, they can step in and play a role to try and promote economic growth. All right, and just a reminder, when we're thinking about economic growth, we're thinking about these factors that are going to increase our economy, increase our real GDP, and our real GDP or our real GDP per capita. Remember, any of those supply factors are going to shift our production possibility frontier outward. So it's going to allow goods or points that were not attainable before to become attainable. And so now all of a sudden we can produce more of good 2, more of good 1 at 0 opportunity cost. And let's just make an assumption and let's just say we're producing right here. But it's not alone that supply factor that's going to shift that production possibility frontier outward. We also need consumers to demand those products. And if consumers don't demand it, then we're not going to see companies decide to produce more. And so it's the demand factor that's going to move us outward towards that new production possibility frontier. And again, that efficiency factor, thinking about full employment, moving towards maximizing our scarce resource utilization and ensuring that we operate somewhere on this production possibility frontier, whether we spend all of our time producing good 2, all of good 1, or somewhere in the middle. Again, our production possibility frontier doesn't tell us where we operate, just that we want to, our optimal points are along that production possibility frontier. All right, so with that, we're going to continue on talking about a growing economy in our final lecture.